Bernard's a renowned futurist and he's a demographer. And he writes a weekly column for the Australian newspaper, so he's probably known to most of you. He's authored six best-selling books, and he's a wealth of knowledge on all things demographics. He's one of the key people in Australia who has helped us shape our understanding of who we are. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Bernard tonight. Please welcome Bernard Soul.
Thanks so much, Sue, for that introduction. I'm going to try to present from out here because I simply like to move around. Thanks very much, Sue, for that introduction, and thank you also to the organisers for the invitation to speak. Bernard Soul, I'm a partner with KPMG based in Melbourne. My presentation tonight has the riveting title of the Demographic Outlook for Kalgoorlie-Boulder. It's a little more interesting, hopefully, than that. I have a very simple proposition. And that proposition is that Kalgoorlie-Boulder is a city, a town, a region that actually punches above its weight. But I think it needs to punch above its weight. It is an iconic town on the Australian continent. It has been for 100 years, and I think it is your job to ensure that it remains that sort of a place for the next 50 years. I don't know what businesses, I don't know what commercial opportunities, I don't know what jobs you or those kids will be doing. But I think we can build a community with the right strategies, with the right resilience to actually ensure future prosperity and impact across the Australian continent. That, to me, is the way in which I think we should be looking at Kalgoorlie-Boulder. I want to today have a look at some of the key demographics that I think are relevant to Kalgoorlie-Boulder, and also superimpose that with some of the bigger picture shifts that I think are reshaping Australian society, and marry the two together. Let's start by looking at why I would say I think Kalgoorlie punches above its weight, and while that should be the number one objective of this community. Here are, in fact, the major outback towns of Australia. So 24 million people across the Australian continent. Every one of these towns has more than 10,000 people, so that's Port Lincoln down here, Alice Springs, of course, about 30-odd thousand people, Broome and Port Hedland and Karratha, of course, Perth and Albany, and there's Kalgoorlie. And you see sort of rings around this part of the Australian continent. And you can actually identify an area that I would call the Kingdom of Kalgoorlie. And in fact, this to me is your territory. You are not a town, you are a capital city. You dominate a space on this planet called the Kingdom of Kalgoorlie. It is 1/6 of the Australian continent. And in actual fact, Kalgoorlie might be a town of 33,000 people. At the 1954 census, it was 23,000. So in the last 60 years or so, you've added 10,000 people. Someone told me today that at the peak was about 110,000 people living in this community. We can take this one step further and just get a sense of space, of ownership, of impact, of control that this community has and will have and should have for another generation. In fact, there's the Kingdom, 1/6 of the Australian continent, and you can speak Germany, France and Austria into that community. And in fact, what the Australian people do is say, well, we're going to make the capital of that place Kalgoorlie. This is why Kalgoorlie does and must punch above its weight, simply because of its control of a vast land area of the Australian continent. Here is every town in that kingdom. The Australian Bureau of Statistics is very precise. You're either a town or you're not a town. There is a town with 13 people. I don't know how to pronounce this one. Kukaini is 13 people at the last census. Technically, you need 200 people. For whatever reason, Kukaini is still there as an official town. Merredin, which I was at about 2 years ago, out in the wheat belt, and an extraordinarily warm community. And of course, if you add up all those towns, I don't know how many there are, maybe 17, 18, 20 or so, this is your territory, this is your kingdom. And around about 17,000 people in the urban area, add in Kalgoorlie-Boulder, and the total number of people is 57,000. It's about the same population of Wagga. spread right across 1/6 of the Australian continent. All of the services, all of the facilities, all of the aspiration of a town of 60,000 people spread across this vast area. This makes this community iconic. This gives this community a reason to be, a special place in the minds or the mindset of the Australian people is my point. And in fact, you can look at or benchmark Kalgoorlie-Boulder. I would certainly do this exercise with any town, any community across the Australian continent. Okay, so there's 33,000 people in our town, there's 57,000 in the broader kingdom, if you like. What are the services that we absolutely need in this town? And in fact, you need supermarkets and cinemas and schools and primary schools and universities. But this is what I would do. I'd actually line everything up. And you can do this. So what are we missing? And of course, that's a checklist. In order to prosper in your space over the next 10, 20, 30 years or so, you need the right bits and pieces. And do you have a university campus? Well, tick, tick, tick. I think you do. You have Curtin, and I think you have UWA. In fact, have a campus here as well. Capital City air connection. In fact, yes, you do. Broken Hill, oddly, does not have. These are the population numbers. Broken Hill's only got 20,000 people. In 1976, Broken Hill had 33,000. In fact, if you want a town that has actually gone backwards because the ore has run out, Broken Hill is the best model. Local TV, so you have local production, local stories, local reporting, if you like. Not necessarily a newsreader sitting there, although I think that's best. I actually started my career in Geelong. I'm from the Western District of Victoria. Geelong made a strategic error in 1960. It allowed the new medium of television to be headquartered in Ballarat, and Geelong was then subsumed within the greater broadcast area of Melbourne. For the last 50 years, Geelong is now seen as an outer suburb of Melbourne. There was not the vision in 1960 in Geelong that new stuff, television, can go to Ballarat. The whole of the Western District of Victoria now orientates towards Ballarat. There are checkpoints, there are forks in the road in a town's history where you can go this way or that way. I see local television production as absolutely critical so that you're not swamped by the capital city imagery, culture, if you like. Again, coming from the Western District of Victoria, a very small town near Warrnambool, we always were shown, when you got Melbourne television, you saw Melbourne newsreaders, you saw the city skyline behind. There was never the rural values, the rural imagery. And that to me is very important for a sense of independence. Local TV production, and of course Kalgoorlie-Boulder has that daily paper. I actually had to check this with my PA today, that Geraldton does not offer a daily paper, and here is a town of 40,000 people. My fundamental proposition, point one, is, do you punch above your weight? And the answer is yes, in these measures. And I say, that's not an accident. You need to punch above your weight to provide the services, to have the impact politically and economically in the region, and then local radio, of course. And when you look at all this, there's only one town in all of those, from 20,000 to 40,000, that actually ticks all the boxes, and it's Kalgoorlie-Boulder. And I think it's because of this iconic status and the control over the space of the Australian continent. I'm very much a fan of big picture, high altitude demographics, and I'm a fan of the 1954 census. At the 1954 census, Kalgoorlie-Boulder, well, I think it was just called Kalgoorlie in those days, was in fact the 20th largest city on the Australian continent, had 23,000 people. Here is Kalgoorlie-Boulder today, it's done well, about 10,000 people. It is now number 47. And all of these towns have pushed up. In fact, there is one striking difference between Australia at the 1954 census and Australia today, and Australia in 10, 15, 20 years' time. And in fact, I'm not sure that you'll pick it up just by looking at this list. It's the beauty of demographics. I can look at a list of numbers. I don't see numbers. When I look at this, look at that place. 625,000 people. That did not exist at the 1954 census. The Gold Coast did not exist at the 1954 census. The Australian people are talking to you through these figures. The Australian people were talking to you at the 1954 census. Kalgoorlie, number 20. By 2016, Kalgoorlie, number 47. They are telling you what their preferences are. Because it's not just the Gold Coast, but the Sunshine Coast. And in fact, you can go through and see a whole series of lifestyle cities. It is lifestyle that has absolutely been lifted. How do you compete on the lifestyle scale? Of course, you can't offer a beach. I think it was quite telling that that voice talked about a beach. But again, I think that this is certainly something that needs to be configured into the future, punching above your weight, and how can you actually introduce lifestyle? What is the cost of housing? What's the quality of life in Kalgoorlie? How does that compare with other communities? And in fact, so I thought it would also be relevant to talk about the bigger picture demographic trends that are shaping Australia at the moment. You can't be in the business of demographics and not have cool acronyms like yuppies and dinks. So here's some of the coolest acronyms to describe the latest tribes of Australia. The first one are the pumpkins, P-U-M-C-I-N-S. I suspect that there are lots of pumpkins in Perth and Melbourne and Brisbane. I'm not sure whether you get them in Kalgoorlie. It stands for the professional urban middle class in nice suburbs. You can tell pumpkin men on a weekend they wear polo shirts, chinos and boat shoes. And you can tell pumpkin women they wear their active wear absolutely everywhere. And you can tell if you come from a pumpkin household if there's goat's cheese in the fridge. I have this theory that households that eat goat's cheese do not eat McDonald's. They are mutually repellent. Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Perth have what is known as a goat's cheese curtain. It's about 5 kilometres out from the CBD, rather inside or outside the goat's cheese curtain. Subiaco is inside the goat's cheese curtain. Then of course, this is the nettles. These are the young power couples, 35 to 45, kids under the age of 15, both partners working, household income of more than $150,000 per year. Nettle stands for not enough time to enjoy life. And you can tell if you come from a Nettle household if after the evening meal you and your partner get out your iPhone and coordinate the next day's activities. And if you email the schedule to your nanny, then you're an Uber Nettle. I have seen that done. We make these terms up. I wanted a term to describe this particular tribe. My PA came up with the term Nettle. I loved it so much, I did the column on it in The Australian. I think the Oz put it on page 3. 2 days later, it popped up in the New York Times New Word Dictionary. So you really know you've made it. Completely fabricated a new word. Then, of course, you have the kippers. These are the young 20-somethings that live at home with their 50-something mum and dad. K-I-P-P-E-R-S. Kids in parents' pockets, eroding retirement savings. And I have a couple of kippers myself. And then, of course, everyone knows Lombards, L-O-M-B-A-R-D-S. Lots of money, but a real dickhead. Let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to the way in which Australians are living today, and compare that with previous times in history. Go back 80 years. To look at life expectancy in Australia in 1936. In 1936, the average Australian lived for 63 years. You qualified for the age pension at 65, so you promptly dropped dead 2 years before you got a pension back in 1936. The other thing to note is that in 1936, you're a child for 14 years and then you're an adult. The life form we know as the teenager did not exist in 1936. Childhood, adulthood, old age and death. That's the way it worked 80 years ago. No need to save for retirement because everyone expected to drop dead in the workplace. There was no superannuation at that time. 40 years later, life expectancy is now 71. That is 6 years in retirement. You work for 50 years, you retire at 65, you drop dead at 71. That's basically how it works. And you're an old person at 61 or 62. The term the teenager suddenly emerged. It was a creation of the baby boomers. in fact 13 to 19, and you're now not old until well into your 60s. Let's kick it forward another 40 years to 2016. Life expectancy is now 82. That is 17 years in retirement. Although the most common age at retirement for an Australian is not 65, it is 58. That is 24 years in retirement. What are you going to do? Sit at home and babysit the grandkids for 24 years? Baby boomers will simply not do that. They will reinvent that space. They will work 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, 1 day per week. You will not know whether someone is working or whether someone is retired. And the reason why baby boomers will extend the working life in a reduced capacity, working 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 day per week, is because they haven't saved enough to live in retirement in the manner to which they've become accustomed. So you extend the working life. There is a new narrative of life. I want to resign as a partner at KPMG and come back as a consultant, as a contractor, as a mentor, as a director. Work relationships will have to shift. The issue of ageism and age diversity. You don't have anyone in your organisation over the age of 60. You have no one in your organisation that remembers the recession of 1992. I think this will become a major issue for society and for the workplace going forward. This idea of a generation reaching in and changing the way life is lived has occurred before, with Gen Y picking up the teenage phase in life invented by the baby boomers. They've picked it up and they've stretched it. I think you're now a teenager between the ages of 13 and 29. All of the measures of the transition into adulthood that baby boomers are making at 21, 22, 23, commitment to marriage, mortgage, children and a career, has been kicked out by Gen X and Gen Y to 28 and 29 or 30. That changes the use of time and money in the 20-something time in life. If you're not committed to marriage, mortgage, children and a career, then you don't need to be in a 3-bedroom brick veneer on the edge of town. You need to be in an inner city apartment where you can form, dismantle and reform relationships before you make your final selection just on the right side of 30. The driving force behind this is a postponement of commitment to marriage. In 1971, the average age of first marriage for an Australian woman was 21. She was a baby boomer born in 1950. She would have announced her engagement on her 21st birthday, otherwise she thought she was going to be on the shelf. Today, the average age of first marriage for an Australian woman is 29. 8 years has opened up. Cafes, bars, restaurants, gap years. Who had heard of a gap year 10 years ago? This is an invention by Generation Y, paid for by baby boomer parents, designed to extend that period of adolescence. And in fact, if you were to today announce your engagement on your 21st birthday, you would be regarded as a loser. You should have completed tertiary education, paid off ex, travelled overseas, established and developed a career. The narrative of life has shifted. The narrative of life has shifted, creating hipsters and Gen Y, the options generation. The narrative of life will shift. 58 to 72. What are the products? What are the services? What is the marketing? What is the lifestyle pitch that a product, a service, a community, a town might want to project to own that space going forward? That to me, it's not retirement. Never use the R word to a baby boomer. They will never retire. Their parents retired. Old people retired. The baby boomers are the first generation of 60-somethings who have seen their parents age into their 80s. And they are damn sure they are not going to age like that. And they are now, they've got bucket lists. I want to do the Rhine River cruise, and then I want to do the Alaskan cruise, then I want to do the Around the Australia thing. How does that narrative fit into your product? Whatever product it is. If the product is a town, an iconic region, how can you connect into the gut values of the Australian people? How has Chapel Street, Melbourne, or Paddington in Sydney, or Subiaco connected into the values by which 20-somethings will want to live their life? Absolutely hit the zeitgeist over the last 10 or 15 years. And I think there is an opportunity for Kalgoorlie-Boulder to perhaps hit the zeitgeist in that 58 to 72. Not a rush across Australia, but a connection, a lifestyle connection that Australians are looking for going forward as they age. Let's have a look at some of the generations, starting with the baby boomers, born 1946 to 1964. Baby boomers are in their late 50s, 60s today. And in fact, baby boomers are deeply hierarchical. They were raised by people that touched the Great Depression, that fought in the Second World War. If you're one of 6 kids in a baby boomer family, you understand concepts like deference, hierarchy, waiting your turn and hand-me-down clothes. If you're a single kid raised by rich parents in prosperous times, you wait for nothing. I want it, and I want it now. Baby boomers are also the sandwich generation. They're dealing with their 20-something kipper kids and their 80 to 90-something parents, in fact. Then, of course, you have Generation X, today's 30-somethings and 40-somethings, always in the wrong place at the wrong time. I regard the X's as the pissed off generation. They're sick of baby boomers, they're sick of Generation Y. What about me? Baby boomers got fee-free tertiary education, 1972 to 1987. When did X's go to university? Late 1980s, in came HEX. When did X's go into the workforce? Early 1990s. Unemployment peaked at 12%. Then they went into the workforce, working to baby boomer management, waiting to get their hands on the top job. Just after the year 2000, into the workforce came young Generation Y. And baby boomer management's focus went straight to the Ys. Are we paying you enough, Generation Y? Is anyone being mean to you, Generation Y? Can I get you a pillow, Generation Y? Bugger, Generation Y, you didn't do that for me when I started in the workforce. The good news for X's is that you've now got your hands on the top job and now you can wreak your revenge on Generation Y. Then, of course, you have Generation Y, today's teenagers and 20-somethings. This is the special generation. From the age of 5, they've been told they are special by their parents, by their teachers, by their employers, which is all well and good, but what happens when this special generation wakes up at the age of 35? They're married with a mortgage and kids looking straight down the barrel towards middle age. They wake up one day and they realise, I'm not rich, I'm not famous, I'm not a celebrity, I've been lied to all my life. It'll all be someone else's fault, of course. How can their middle age possibly live up to the expectations they had in youth? Ultimately, they could be known as the disappointed generation, an extraordinarily entrepreneurial generation. Unlike the baby boomers, their parents, they are not committed to marriage, mortgage, children or career in their 20s. They are footloose, fancy-free, highly educated, globally travelled, digitally connected. They are entrepreneurial. What they want to do is to be involved in a startup. If there is a way that any community on the Australian continent could harness that creativity, that entrepreneurship, that enterprise, energy coming out of Gen Y, who could do that? I reckon it would be a community that is self-sufficient, that is resilient, that is not always in the shadow of Canberra or a capital city. It would be an independent community, the Kingdom of Kalgoorlie. We will show Australia how you actually cultivate and incubate and create new businesses, because we are a community. I used to play basketball as a kid, as a teenager. There's a point in basketball where you get 2 free throws, and you have the first throw and you miss it. The other 4 teammates will come along behind and go, no worries mate, you'll get it next time. And it is that principle that you could get in a Kalgoorlie-Boulder that you will not get somewhere else. How can we harness the energy, the intellect, the experience of this community's baby boomers, connect it with Generation Y and their entrepreneurial aspiration? How can we do this better than anyone else on the Australian continent? Because we are the Kingdom of Kalgoorlie and we punch above our weight. And we do not see limitations. We do not see limitations because we are 33,000 people or 60,000 people, as might a suburb of Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane or Auckland might see. We are proudly independent, and damn it, we can do it. We will set our vision at that level. And you might say, well, how do we do it? Well, what about a festival of creative thinking, a festival of enterprise? I travel around Australia, go to country towns all the time, regional centres. The first thing the mayor will say to me, and I've got the mayor tonight here, the first thing the mayor will say to me is, so-and-so, a test cricket captain, used to come from here. Or such and such, an AFL footballer, used to come from here. And I find it terribly sad that they're defining themselves by people who are no longer there. What I want to see is, no, I don't want that kid to aspire to be an AFL footballer. I want that kid to actually be inspired by a photograph on the front page of the Kalgoorlie Miner that is celebrated by the community because they won New Business Entrepreneur of the Year 2016. And that 28-year-old might be a builder or a hairdresser or whatever it is, employing 3 apprentices, paying their tax, contributing to the community. I would rather celebrate that person than an absent AFL footballer in Melbourne that rarely comes home. Because I want that 8-year-old kid in primary school to say, I didn't know you could do that. That, to me, is where you can make a difference. You have skills, you have a unique opportunity here. I think it simply needs to be fashioned, sharpened, appetite whetted, pointed in the right direction. Yeah, we can do that. And we are going to do it better than anyone else on the Australian continent. So you can actually have local heroes. Gen Z, these are the children of Generation X women, the second generation of women who went back to work. They carry no guilt about this. Little kid, I work, get over it, you're not special, that's the way it is. Very different, very entrepreneurial, very pragmatic, raised to adulthood in a post-GFC world. Very pragmatic kids. Where are the jobs in Australia in the 21st century? You can measure this, and it's here. As a fact, we know that between February 2000 and February 2016, the Australian economy, the Australian continent, created 3.5 million jobs. Full-time jobs, part-time jobs, good jobs, bad jobs, high-altitude demographics. This nation of 24 million people created 3.5 million jobs in 16 years. That is a fact. We lost 360,000 jobs. 1,000 jobs were lost when Alcoa closed in Geelong. 250 jobs were lost when Queensland Nickel closed in Townsville. But stand back for a second, hang on. For every job we have lost in the 21st century, have we created 10 others? Why are we focused on the 1 in 10 and not on the opportunities that are being created across Australia? Where are the happy jobs? Where is the economy absolutely expanding? Because I want to gear my future strategy in that direction. And so, well, actually, we can measure that. There they are. Health, 700,000 jobs as a fact created in net terms since the year 2000. Healthcare and social assistance, professional services, construction, education is there. Where are the jobs contracting? Well, that'd be in manufacturing and agriculture. In fact, if you go to Merredin, I was there, as I said, 2 years ago, a big header, big harvester machines. We're producing more agricultural output than ever before. We just don't need the labour to do that. We're incredibly efficient. And manufacturing, well, that's really been offshore to Guangzhou. So we'll never look at the numbers in demographics. What are the Australian people telling you through these figures? What is the insight that we can garner from this to inject into our future strategy? What is the common denominator between the left and the right-hand side of the chart? And I say that in order to participate in the prosperity of modern Australia, you need a university degree or technical training. These are knowledge workers. How does Kalgoorlie-Boulder, the Kingdom of Kalgoorlie, compete in the knowledge worker space? Do you have university campuses? Do you have TAFE campuses? Do you have private schools? Do you have what is the range of education? Do you have a mindset amongst parents that actually values education? How can we as a community build that into a Futures Forum? These are really hard. It's not, Futures Forum is easy, hello, we need a new airport, we need this, need that, done, tick. No, it's cultural shift that falls to every Kalgoorlie-Boulder resident. How can we shift the culture of this town to actually ready our kids for the jobs of the future? That, to me, is the greatest challenge going forward. Down here, unskilled, low-skilled, barely skilled people, do we really want to live? I don't want to live in Australia where unskilled, low-skilled, barely skilled people do not have a chance at competing for the prosperity of the Australian continent. This, to me, is a great social and political challenge of our time. Upskilling, reskilling, relocating, engaging. There might be people in Kalgoorlie-Boulder in that space. What do? Just leave them there? Manage the outcome? Or do we have in the Futures Forum a volunteering program, a social inclusion program, a program designed to draw people into the community? That delivers resilience into the future. That's the community that I want to be part of in the 2020s, 2030s. And just finally, a couple of points. Kalgoorlie-Boulder is a big city by Australian standards, big city by outback Australian standards. If you go to somewhere like America, go to their equivalent of the outback, say the Southwest, Phoenix, Arizona, at the end of the Second World War, had 200,000 people. Today it has 4.5 million. The Americans will have put 4.5 million people in the middle of the desert. We have nothing to compare. We're not a desert people. We're a beach and coastal people. So 33,000 people in the outback is a significant number by Australian standards. My point here is around resilience. I can't say what businesses, what mineral, what resource will be required in 2025, 2035, 2045. But I reckon in the 2030s, I reckon in the 2040s, that there's going to be ups and downs, the booms and bust that have marked this community and the whole of the Western Australian state probably for 100 years. What can we do about that? Well, you could actually create resilient communities, flexible communities, people that have the soft skills to say, you know, I was trained as a miner, as an engineer, but I can take those skills and apply them over there. No, I'm a miner. I'll wait until the next boom. That is the wrong thinking. Flexibility, fluidity, agility, mobility, upskillability, affability. The average 20-year-old today will actually have 20 jobs in 15 different employers over the next 40 years. That means that no less than 20 times, perhaps even 40 times in their career, they're going to have to walk into an office and present themselves and argue their case. You can't do that if you don't have self-confidence, if you're not affable, if you're not fluid, if you're not articulate. These are the skills that you will not learn at Curtin University or at University of WA. You might pick them up and refine them, but there's no course on this. You will learn this at home from mum and dad with their attitude and training. That, to me, is a way of building resilience into the future. A culture of enterprise. Can we have a festival of enterprise, a festival of entrepreneurship, where we identify the best new business created from a standing start in this community over the last 12 months by someone under the age of 30? I want an aspiration, a role model for that 8-year-old kid that was in there, so that they say, you know, I want to start my own business. That's what I want to see going forward. And soft skills to future-proof your careers. That comes down to parents. Just finally, I want to introduce you to some new research that I've done on the most recent census. I have scanned the entire kingdom of Kalgoorlie. I've scanned every region, every town, every precinct, every village, every suburb of Kalgoorlie in order to find Kalgoorlie-Boulder's bachelor hotspot. Where is the highest concentration of eligible young men in Kalgoorlie-Boulder? And by young, I mean 25 to 34, 5 years either side of prime marriageable age, and single, separated, widowed, never married or divorced. These boys are on the market. Where is the highest concentration of eligible young bachelors relative to eligible young women? I've run the numbers. These are real numbers from the census. The highest concentration is to be found in the suburb of Somerville, in fact, 2.24 eligible young bachelors per eligible young female, according to the most recent census. Clearly the Somerville pub on a Friday night is the place to be. I have, in fact, I don't know whether there is a pub. There needs to be a pub. I have, in fact, run these numbers for every major city in Australia, including my hometown of Melbourne, and the highest concentration of eligible young bachelors right across Melbourne is in a suburb known as West Footscray, and I have been told, that the odds might be good, but the goods are odd. I would never say that about something. I've been told that. You can actually look at exactly the same figures for eligible young women. Right across the kingdom of Kalgoorlie, what suburb, what neighbourhood, what precinct, what village, what district has the highest concentration of eligible young women relative to eligible young men, according to the census. I've run the numbers, and that hotspot is in fact in Esperance. 1.25 single young females relative to single young males. The odds are good down in Esperance. Of course, Somerville is linked to Esperance by the Kalgoorlie-Esperance Highway, which I think should be renamed the Highway of Love. We have the boys of Somerville with the girls of Esperance. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Bernard. Now that we've declared the kingdom, I think we're going to have to stop calling John the Mayor. We're going to have to start calling him the King. What's the consensus? Is that a yes? I think yes. Well, we know what the headline in the daily paper is tomorrow. It's the Kingdom of Kalgoorlie has been declared.